The Principal Cause of Death. Author Mark Richard Zubero. Publisher St. Martin's Press, New York. Narrator Eric Aust. For Michael in learning the meaning of friendship. Acknowledgements. For their invaluable assistance, I wish to thank Mike Kushner, Peg Panzer, Rick Paul, and Kathy Pekaserid. Chapter 2. Because of the bloodstains, the police had confiscated my shirt, so I had to stop at home for a new one. I took an extra pain pill to deaden the throbbing in my arm. In my gleaming black four-wheel drive truck, I opened the window and steadied my arm on the opening. A few minutes later, I was on I-80, heading toward I-57 and the Dan Ryan Expressway. I had called ahead to the ballpark to make sure my ticket was still saved. Fortunately, what with all the falderall of the last game of the season, they'd started late. I arrived in time for the 8th and 9th innings. The pecking order for tickets was the same as it is in many major league teams. The wife of the starting pitcher got seat 1A. In the family section, Scott, not being attached to a woman, used to just give up his ticket. As the years of our relationship went on and he became less closeted, he'd simply give me the ticket. The only problem was that I could rarely get to the games because of my own busy schedule. I like to see him pitch at least 4 or 5 times a year. It's fun watching him out on the mound in his tight pants, fantasizing about all the things I'd done or planned to do with his body in our bed. My semi-regular presence in the family section caused barely a ripple among the relatives and friends. Scott's teammates liked him, and he was popular among the wise, even when he started giving away seats to people with AIDS who wanted to attend games. It wasn't a hassle. I settled into my seat, saw him notice me as he entered the dugout after the bottom of the 8th. In fairly typical Chicago tradition, the team managed to blow the lead in the 9th, and Scott lost the game. This was the first time in 5 seasons he hadn't won 20 games. I waited in my truck outside the ballpark. Scott was one of the last players to walk out of the clubhouse. Kids and adults swarmed around him for autographs. Even at this late hour, patiently he signed every program and slip of paper. As one of the few stars in the championship-starved town, he was immensely popular. Finally, he made his way to the passenger side of the truck, opened the door, and plopped himself into the seat. He wore khaki Bermuda shorts that clung to his slender waist and hips, along with a plain white t-shirt over his muscular frame. "Where were you until the 8th inning?" Scott asked. "I got a little worried." I told him the story on the way to Ann Sather's restaurant on Belmont. When I finished, I glanced over at him, then back to the road. In a gesture I knew well, he used his left hand to knead the muscles of his right shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked. "It's still not real to me yet. I've never been accused of murder before." Over dinner, we talked of possible explanations and suspects. We managed the meal without Scott being recognized, an accomplishment in itself. Sometimes we can dine out in total anonymity, and other times we've had to flee from overzealous fans. It seems to be the luck of the moment that determines his recognizability. I drove to his place. He owns a penthouse on Lakeshore Drive. Once there, we performed our post-game ritual. Every time he pitched in Chicago, we went back to his place and had a post-mortem so he could depressurize. Lying on the floor or backs against a white leather couch, we'd talk about the game, pitches he should or shouldn't have made. We wore similar outfits, white jockey shorts and athletic socks. Tonight, we talked mostly about the events at school. He was equally concerned about the Bluefield incident as he was about the murder. As I told him about it, my feelings of guilt returned. We continued the discussion as we performed the next stage of the post-game ritual on the couch we'd been leaning against. He lay on his stomach while I straddled his torso. Normally, for half an hour, I would gently massage all the muscles in his body, spending at least 15 minutes ministering to his right shoulder. Then we'd have wild hot sex with only the lights from the city below illuminating the room. Afterward, we'd have cookies and milk in the breakfast nook, which looked out over Lake Michigan. Sometimes these evenings didn't end until past 3 or 4 in the morning. Tonight, because of my arm, we had to make do with the sex and Oreo cookies and milk. Scott still pulls the cookies apart to lick the middle off before eating the rest. We kept talking about the murder. Halfway through, he said, "You seem pretty calm about the whole situation." "I know. I didn't do it, and I assume they'll find some evidence of whoever did. But according to you, the guy didn't have a lot of enemies. It could be anybody, including the Bluefield kid. I can't believe others haven't seen through him." "Thanks for your faith in my insights. The kid is clever, but I don't see him murdering Jones. The principal was his friend. Jones didn't have a lot of enemies I know about. Certainly no one I would consider a murderer. But you're right, it could be anybody. So, the police could try and save themselves a lot of hassle and just pick you. No more investigation and a murder solved. Frank Murphy won't let them get away with that. Look, lover, I wouldn't put too much faith in Frank's friendship. This is murder. They'll want somebody, and quickly. What do you suggest? Are they going to let you teach tomorrow?" "Why shouldn't they?" "Earth to Tom. You are a suspect in a murder investigation, so you're hardly someone they'd let be in front of a classroom, are you? Innocent until proven guilty. At least on this part of the planet. Besides, the superintendent didn't say anything to me. I don't think she tried to stop me." He shook his head. "For the moment, I just don't think I had that much to worry about." We finished our dessert without coming up with any solutions. Later in bed, he lay with his arms around me, snuggled close. I listened to the hum of the digital clock on the nightstand next to the bed, heard his breathing, felt the down on his chest against my back. I found I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the sight of the knife sticking out of Jones's back that kept running through my mind, although that was part of it. The incident with Bluefield replayed itself over and over. I felt monumentally guilty and depressed. I heard Scott's breathing become regular and even. I moved away. I tossed and turned, refusing to look at the clock to see how late it was. I felt myself coiled and ready to spring. Very little can waken Scott, but when I'm restless and unable to sleep, somehow he senses it. It seemed like hours later when he murmured, "Something's still bothering you." I mumbled that I was okay. He turned on the light on his side of the bed. I flinched from the brightness. I turned over and saw him sitting up. "Want to talk about it?" he said. "What it?" "You're tense enough to wake me up. You're ready to explode. Tell me I'm wrong." "I'm not ready to explode," I said. "It's just..." I got up, picked up a pair of my jeans from the floor, and pulled them on. I walked to the windows and looked down on the cars still streaming by on Lake Shore Drive this late at night. I turned back to him. He sat up in the bed, knees raised, one hand draped on each. The blanket still covered him to his stomach. His blue eyes caught mine, but he said nothing. The man is a master at waiting for me to say something. I turned the rocking chair next to the window to face him, and I eased into it. "I wanted to hurt that boy." He nodded. "I wanted Bluefield to never taunt another teacher again. I wanted to make sure he'd never harass another fellow human being. I wanted him to feel enough pain to change his fucked up life." Scott watched me carefully. "I wanted to make up for every bit of frustration he's caused me. I wanted him to know that I was a mean, tough, powerful bastard who he'd better never fuck with. I wanted him to know what revenge feels like." Scott's eyes bored into mine. "I feel like shit. I lost control with a student. I hurt a kid, and I feel enormous guilt. And I'm angry at myself for feeling the guilt. I had no business trying to hurt the kid, and that's what I was trying to do once I got the knife away from him. Hurt him, and cause pain. And it felt good to hit him." I thought, this is for every teacher, everywhere, who is made to suffer because of rotten little kids. I enjoyed it, and I feel guilty about it, enjoying it. I sighed and repeated, "I feel like shit, and on top of all that, it's the last game of the season. We haven't talked about it for more than 2 minutes, and I know how difficult this time can be for you." For 2 or 3 days after the season ends, Scott usually goes into a minor depression. He goes from a world of huge crowds, center stage, and racing adrenaline to one of relative calm and placidity, and it takes him a while to adjust to help his re-entry to a more staid lifestyle. We go to a cabin on the shores of Lake Superior for a weekend so we can totally depressurize. I looked forward to those days with him. Silence lengthened between us. He gazed at me quietly. Finally, I said, "Say something." He said, "I'm waiting for you to get to the part you need to feel guilt about." "I told you." "I listened carefully to all you said." His soft voice thrummed. I could hear the traces of his southern drawl. "You're honest with yourself. You understand yourself. You wish you could make go away a lot of the things that happened today." I nodded. "And I wish I could take them away from you," he said. "And maybe you saw parts of yourself that you don't like or wish were difficult." I listened to a man who I've seen sacrifice himself for kids for the 10 years I've known him, who I've seen do more than any 20 teachers put together to help troubled and despairing children and families. I think you reacted to a threatening situation in an appropriate way. You wish there was another way to have handled this situation?" "Yes," I said. "And what would that have been?" he asked. "I should have been able to stop him some other way," I whispered. "You're being stubborn," Scott said, "and you're not listening to me." I folded my arms over my chest, the window at the velvet night over Chicago, and said, through clenched teeth, "I am not being stubborn." "Look," Scott began reasonably, "it's late. You've got school tomorrow, and you need to let yourself off the hook. I think you need to be a little more honest and fair about what happened." He got out of bed, grabbed a pair of jeans from the closet, tugged them on, and came over to me. He sat on the ottoman next to the rocker, took my hand, and said, "There wasn't anything else you could have done. You lost control, so what? The first time in 18 years you can punish yourself for that if you want. If you need to feel guilt, go ahead, but I know I love you as much today as I did yesterday, that you're the same kind gentleman I knew then. You're human with faults, but I already knew that." He smiled. I felt the tug of a grin at the corners of my mouth. "As for talking about the game, you're more important to me than any other person or thing in this world. And I know we'll have time together in the cabin in a week and a half." We crawled back into bed. "Thanks," I murmured as I drifted off to sleep. The next day at school was chaos unlimited. At 7:30, before they let the kids in the building, we had a full staff and faculty meeting with a crisis team. Nowadays, when a member of a school community dies, a crisis team is brought in. This is a group of psychologists, therapists, social workers, and others who are trained in handling emotional upheavals. And they travel from school to school, bringing their expertise with them. At the meeting, Donna Dalrymple glared daggers in my direction. Kurt Campbell, the union president, and Meg sat on either side of me, as Scott had that morning. They asked if I felt okay enough to be at school. I told them I was fine. The crisis team informed us that we should try to hold our classes in a normal fashion, to speak about the death if kids brought it up, and that any student who showed signs of stress should be sent to them immediately. They had taken over 2 classrooms in the old section for conferences with individual students too upset to attend classes. Carol Blackburn, the superintendent, caught up with me in the hallway after the meeting. Kurt materialized at my elbow. Carolyn looked annoyed. She said, "I need to speak with Mr. Mason." Kurt said, "I think a union representative should be present." She frowned at him, but didn't comment. She led the way to the office next to Jones's, where she sat behind a cheap metal desk. We took plastic cushioned chairs in front of her. Carolyn had until recently been the principal of Grover Cleveland and was one of the few administrators I almost trusted. "This is a difficult situation," she said. "Bluefield's dad is due any minute, and he is not happy with you, Tom." "He should be coming down hard on his asshole son," I said. "Probably," Carolyn said. "He wants to meet with you. I'd like to be present." I agreed. Mr. Bluefield's first comment was, "Why is this man still in this school? He attacked my boy. Dan's got a broken wrist. He'll be in a cast for weeks." "He attempted to rape one of our teachers yesterday," Carolyn said. "We consider that a serious charge." "He didn't touch her. It's his word against hers. She's probably some slut." Carolyn cut him off. "As long as you are in this office, in my presence, Mr. Bluefield, you will confine yourself to proper language." "We're all grown-ups here," he said. "You've heard these words before." Whether I've heard them or even said them, this is a professional meeting and you will control what you say, Carolyn said. Bluefield looked frustrated and ready to argue some more. Carolyn said, "What can we help you with, Mr. Bluefield?" He considered Carolyn's comments. The father and son had the same thin, wiry, tightly muscled frame, but Mr. Bluefield might have had the beginning of a paunch. He had a pale blonde hair, a bushy mustache, and a ponytail. He hadn't shaved this morning. He wore tight, faded blue jeans and a flannel shirt. Bluefield pointed at me. "I want him fired." "Mr. Mason is not going to be fired," Carolyn spoke firmly and decisively. "You're backing him up in child abuse?" Carolyn laughed. "Your son is over 6 feet tall, and when he isn't suspended or on probation, he's one of the top wrestlers in the school. If he'd had any ambition or self-control, he could probably have won at the state level. Child abuse is a frivolous charge. I agreed to this meeting so we could work out what to do about Dan. He will not be permitted back in the school. The student teacher and Mr. Mason may press charges." Bluefield hardly looked abashed at all. He blustered for a while about teachers always picking on his kid at intervals, mixing in remarks about the unfairness of the police. Finally, Carolyn stopped him. "Mr. Bluefield, why did you want to meet with Mr. Mason?" "To pound the shit out of him." Carolyn sighed. "Then there is no further purpose in continuing this meeting." She got Bluefield out of the office and returned. She sat back at the desk. "Your presence is going to be disruptive, Tom," she said. "How so?" Kurt asked. He'd sat quietly during the entire exchange with Bluefield. "Kids, teachers, secretaries, everybody is going to be asking questions. The Bluefield incident alone would be cause enough for talk. The murder is going to cause even more chaos. Are you sure you want to go ahead with teaching today?" I shrugged. "I don't see why not. People are going to ask questions whether I come back today or in a week." Kurt asked, "Has the practice teacher been interviewed by school personnel?" "I talked to her myself," Carolyn said, and shook her head. "She wasn't particularly articulate. She may not press charges. I was bluffing with Bluefield earlier. She's frightened. Not the first woman traumatized by an attack." "Tom is in the clear, like the police said last night?" Kurt asked. "Pretty much, but it won't be that simple," the superintendent said. "The murder and the attack together add extra dimensions to the situation. Board members have questions. We've already had calls from parents asking that their children be taken out of Mr. Mason's class." "You're going to let the stupid and ignorant people run this school?" Kurt asked. "Your obligation is to protect your staff." "And I will. I'm just giving you information and a different perspective. Some of them are saying that Tom is a threat to the students." Kurt said, "Don't be absurd. Either they bring some charges or they forget it. We're not going to be part of a witch hunt by loony parents." Carolyn agreed, then said, "At any rate, Bluefield is suspended for the moment. I'm going to recommend expulsion to the board. We'll see what happens. Also, we had reporters around last night and more today. They won't be allowed in the school. We haven't and won't give them your name, Tom, or anybody else's." We left. By noon, the lines waiting to see the counselors from the crisis intervention team stretched throughout the old section of Grover Cleveland and doubled back through the main hallway of the new section. I caught up with Meg outside the library. "This is madness," she said as two girls walked by sobbing hysterically. "Have you seen Tana?" I shook my head. She grabbed my good arm and dragged me through the library to her office. "You won't believe what's happening. I know for a fact that those two sobbing in the hallway just now had never talked to Jones. Never knew him except as a man who spoke once a year at the opening assembly. Grief and woe are totally out of control, with kids who didn't even know the man. I think these kids are taking advantage of the situation and this crisis team," she snorted. "Those hypocrites are using Jones's death as an excuse to get out of class. It makes me sick. The way these kids are acting makes a mockery of genuine sorrow." "Grief can do strange things," I said. "Maybe they're sorry for the loss." "Maybe." Meg didn't sound convinced. I know what they should do: cry with the genuinely grieving and send the sobbing hypocrites packing. Abruptly, she switched topics. Do you have any idea who might have killed Jones? At the moment, I'm prime suspect number one. Redundant, but true, she said. Since we know you didn't do it, who did? That's what Scott asked me last night. I don't like being a murder suspect. I may have been set up. Maybe even by Dan Bluefield in some way. I'm going to do some checking. See who was around last night. See who had a grudge against Jones. I don't know what kind of list you'll come up with, Meg said. He was a competent administrator and intended to make sure the school maintained high standards. His very competence could have been a threat to some people. I know, Meg said. I'll try and revive the old grapevine and see what I can find out. I thanked her and left. I knew who I wanted to find, and I knew where he'd be. Al Wellman was one of the oldest members of the faculty. He ate at a desk in the English department office every day. I knew what he would be wearing. It was Wednesday, and every Wednesday since I'd taught at Grover Cleveland, and I'd been told since long before then, he'd worn his brown cardigan sweater, brown corduroy pants, brown shoes, brown socks, tan shirt, and black tie. Each day's outfit included some outward affectation. An umbrella, a beret, a scarf, a 6-inch wide smile button, a rose in his lapel. Since it was Wednesday, he'd be eating a tuna fish sandwich with mustard and no mayonnaise. He'd have a red pen stuck behind his left ear and a stack of papers in front of him. After he was through with them, the student essays he graded would bleed red ink. He ate and graded at the same time. All of us English teachers have tricks to wade through the stacks of papers. The trash can, when no one else is looking, is the English teacher's greatest friend. Wellman graded every single paper the kids turned in, taking the concept of dedication to the point of madness. Wellman had hated Robert Jones with an incredible passion, and as a creature of habit, would have been in the school grading papers during the time the murder was committed. I wanted to find out what he knew. I found him in the predicted position. One of the last things Jones had done as principal was announce that he would be revising every English teacher's schedule at the beginning of the next semester. This may not compare with other upheavals in history, like the Russian Revolution and the Napoleonic Wars, but to the English department at Grover Cleveland High School, he might as well have announced World War III. The head of the department at 3 meetings last school year, 2 meetings this summer and 1 meeting a week ago, reassured us that as little disruption would occur as possible. Teachers get into ruts. Some of us teach the same thing for years and are quite content. We feel we've paid our dues and earned those classes of bright seniors and other less fractious students, and here was Robert Jones, after 1 year and 1 month on the job, ordering the restructuring of the entire department. I attended the meetings between Jones and the department head because I'm the union's building representative. I was there to prevent Jones from screwing with the union contract. Unfortunately, I couldn't find anything he did that violated it. I had no real objection to the changes he wanted, other than the minor annoyance of revising lesson plans, something I don't find to be traumatic. In private meetings with the head of the department, Jones used Al Wellman as his example of the need for change. Al was too poor to retire and had only a meager pension to look forward to. By common consent, he got the easiest assignments in the department. The last couple of years, he'd had trouble with even these. Most of the rest of us tried to take some of the burden off him. The quarterly paperwork for his homeroom got done on a rotating basis by other staff members. We quietly had scheduled changes for the few discipline problems he had in his classrooms. Still, he'd become less and less effective in his teachings every year. Al and I had met with Jones numerous times. They had arguments and once even a shouting match. It got so Al wouldn't say hello to Jones in the hallway without me as union rep being present. Yet I couldn't deny the reason of Robert Jones' argument. He wanted the best education possible for the kids at Grover Cleveland, and they weren't getting it from Wellman. I thought Jones would have been kinder in the way he went about his work, but perhaps there isn't a way to tell someone who's been working the same job for 40 years that he isn't any good anymore. I thought Jones reached the point of being inhumane and cruel when he told Wellman that he had to teach an out-of-license biology class. They can do that in Illinois as long as you teach at least half of your classes in your major area. They can assign you to anything else for the rest of the day. I knew trying to teach biology would destroy Al, but I didn't lose my temper until Jones made a sneering crack about how we all have to be willing to change. I hadn't raised my voice, but I let him know in no uncertain terms how unfair he was being. Didn't have the slightest effect. After one of these meetings, Jones had asked me to stay. For a minute, he remained seated as I stood near the door. You know I'm making these decisions in the best interest of the students. He can't make it anymore. I remembered gazing at Jones's silently as he threatened to be in Wellman's classroom as often as possible to observe the old man. This is one of the administrators' tricks. When they don't like a teacher, they come into your class and observe you. Formal observations happen to teachers depending on the school district's policies and the union contract. The observation then leads to evaluation. Numerous and constant observations are a good way to unnerve any insecure teacher, and even a competent person doesn't dance with joy at the prospect of an administrator hanging around the classroom constantly. What harm is he doing? I'd asked. You know as well as I what harm. These kids deserve the best education. He isn't giving it to them. I was brought in to improve this school. I'm going to do it. This statement put it mildly. Rumor among the teachers was that he'd been told to go into that high school and clean it up, especially the deadwood among the faculty. For the first year, his effect had been minimal. To start the second year, he'd put his program of change into high gear. Despite Wellman's dislike for Jones, I didn't see him as a murderer, but his name was high on my list of people to talk to. Driven to desperation, even Al might try anything. Wellman greeted me effusively. I heard you beat up that snotty Bluefield kid. It's about time that little shit got what was coming to him. He sipped from a cup of tea. The back corner of the desk he sat at held a one-burner warmer that always had a pot of water, ready to be heated up for his favorite beverage. With his age-mottled hand, he set the teacup down and picked up half of his tuna sandwich and took an enormous bite. Al was a little over 6 feet tall, with wisps of white hair greased down and pulled straight back from his forehead. I watched him chew for a moment. With his mouth half full, he said softly, I'm glad Jones was dead. I hated him. He had no right to harass me that way. I've given the best years of my life to this school, and he wanted to throw me out like last year's trash. I hated him when he was alive, and I still hate him. He gave you a lot of unnecessary trouble, I said. Damn right. Before he got launched into a full tirade against Jones, I said, You know I'm suspect in the murder. He nodded and took another bite. I'm trying to find out who was around last night. I know you grade papers in here late some evenings. Maybe you could help me with who you saw? Maybe even when they left? Including me? I'd avoided saying that. Wellman had a temper and a one-track mind. Not a good combination. I'd seen a couple of his tantrums with the kids. Years ago, they must have been effective in cowing a teenager. Now, even the freshman laughed when he tried it. He'd do an only slightly milder version of a tantrum with the rest of the faculty, but what we really dreaded was his one-track mind. During a department meeting, if he got an ideal stuck in his head, he never let go. He could hold a wrong-headed notion, a grudge, or simply a whimsical thought for years. I want to clear myself and found the killer. I said, it's hard for me to imagine anybody I know being a murderer, but it's possible. Somebody from around here did it. Wellman took another bite of sandwich, giving himself time to think, or maybe hoping I'd go away. Finally, he glared at me and said, I guess I owe you. You saved my butt more than a couple of times. I said, I don't see why you need to do this annoyed curmudgeon act in the first place. Everybody knows you stay late. Eventually, you'd be on any list of suspects. I don't think you killed him, but we all know the problems you were having with him. Don't push me, he snapped. Maybe I have my own reason for being reluctant to talk. Maybe you've saved my ass, but maybe I think you make a good suspect. Maybe I think they might suspect me, and why should I try to protect you? They think you did it. What good would it do me to try and help you? You'd say that if you had something to hide. I'd say that even if I didn't have anything to hide. I don't want to be a suspect in a murder. You want to be snotty to me? Fine. But then I don't help. I wasn't being snotty. I just don't understand the big problem with talking to me. Oh, don't you? I'll explain so even your young ears can hear properly. See, I know you tell the other teachers what a fool I am in these meetings. You tell them how stupid you think I am. I'd only told Scott that. Not anyone on the faculty. I began to protest, but he raised a hand to forestall me, and he continued. I know what you people do to cover for me. I know what contempt you all have for me. I know you all just want me to quit and go away. Not going to happen. I'm going to be here a long time. All I have is my teacher's pension when I retire. That paltry sum is not going to be a lot, so I'm going to be here for years to come, and I didn't kill him. I was up here grading papers. I didn't see anybody else. I didn't move from here until after 7. I tried to reason with him. I told him I'd never told what happened in meetings, but he refused to believe me, and no matter what I tried to talk about, he'd come back to my blabbing about his behavior in meetings with Jones. I decided to ask Meg to talk to him. They'd known each other for years, and she could sometimes get him to see reason when the rest of us couldn't. As I left, he was already back to grading papers. Next, I walked down to the office to try Georgette. She often knew which teachers were in late around me solicitously for a minute or two. Then I asked her who might have been in after 6 yesterday. You're investigating, she said. I want to find out the truth, I said. I know, being the prime suspect must be hard. Is that what people are saying? She tittered. It's what everybody's saying, but when anybody accuses you of murder, I defend you. People are accusing me? Not in so many words, but people wonder, you know. A little aura of trouble around somebody, and you find out who your true friends are real fast. Over the years, I've seen it happen to any number of people, and for much smaller issues than this. People don't like to be around trouble. She patted my arm. I'll help you. I leaned toward her across the counter and repeated my question about who'd been in the building late yesterday. She thought for a minute, then said, I know Marshall Longfellow. The director of building and maintenance was here. They were trying to fix the heating for the 3rd time this week. He had some man from the electric company with him the last time I saw him, around 4. She leaned over the counter and whispered, I shouldn't tell you this, but under the circumstances, I know he got yelled at by Mr. Jones yesterday for not getting the heat fixed. They had words around noon. We could hear them out here in the office. They weren't as loud as you were after school, but it was pretty bad. She lowered her voice even more. Mr. Jones threatened to fire him. You told the police this? Oh, yes, but I don't know what they decided to do about it, and she leaned even closer. I know Mr. Longfellow drinks on the job, but I didn't tell the police that. Should I have? I don't know. I thought a minute, then asked, who else was here? The football team and all the coaches, of course, but they were out in the field. You could ask them if anybody came into the building. She tapped a well-manicured finger on the Formica countertop while muttering to herself. Let me think. Let me see. She reached back to her desk, grabbed a clipboard, and rifled through the stack of papers attached to it. Here, she said, her fingers pointed to a brief list of after-school clubs. I saw the chess club, the debate team, and the cheerleaders. Fortunately, yesterday had not been an exceptionally busy after-school time. Of course, she said, this doesn't include teachers who may have been staying after school on their own or who may have kept kids after. Thanks, Georgette. At least it's a start. She smiled at me and patted my arm again. I'll help you any way I can, she said. And I knew she would. I didn't have time to talk to anybody then because lunch was almost over. In my room, I checked my master schedule and found that Fiona Wilson, faculty sponsor of the chess club, had a planning period at the same time I did. I knew Fiona Wilson from last year when I was working on the discipline committee with her. She was the most organized and competent person on the committee. She taught all the advanced physics and chemistry courses. I found her in the science department offices. She wore a grayish skirt and a crisply starched white cotton blouse plus a pair of tiny diamond earrings, but no other jewelry. She sat at one of the 3 desks in the room. Masses of paper overwhelmed their tops, except for brief spaces in the center where a teacher could grade more tests and add to the clutter. She looked up from grading papers and gave me a brief smile. We exchanged greetings, and I said, "I understand there was a chess club meeting last night, and you're checking on possible suspects other than yourself?" I nodded. We hadn't become friends while working on the committee, but we had been on the same side in most of the disputes, and the final report came close to most of what she or I proposed. A few of the teachers had wanted to move us back to the Stone Age in discipline. A few even came close to the ideal of torturing the students for misbehavior. I hoped Fiona Wilson remembered the committee work fondly enough to help me out. Without further preliminary, she said, "The meeting ended at 5:30 before the murder took place. I stayed in my classroom. I wanted to work on the computer with a chess problem one of the students brought in. I played with it for an hour and a half. I told this to the police. I have no witnesses that I stayed here all that time, but no one saw me wandering the halls toting a lethal weapon. Somebody totally forthcoming. I could be suspicious about that at my leisure." She said, "We've all heard you're the star suspect. Did you kill him?" I detected humor in her voice as she talked, but a certain wariness as well. I said, "I didn't kill Jones," then asked, "You talked to him much? He had a lot to do with your programs." "Rarely saw him. If he had anything to do with the science department, he saw Andrew Buchanan, head of the department, out sick yesterday. I checked the list of absent faculty with Georgette earlier. I'd managed to eliminate 6 out of the 258 faculty members." I couldn't think of a non-threatening way to ask the next question, so I plunged ahead. "You ever fight with Jones?" Her answer was cold and distant. "I've been very helpful, but I don't want to be involved in this. I answered the questions the police asked. I'd rather not go through this with you, if you don't mind." "No, I never fought with him." She turned back to her desk, looking at me over her shoulder. "I have papers to grade before 8th hour." That helpful conversation left me with enough time to hunt for Marshall Longfellow. Head custodian. Janitors have had strange reputations since the book Up the Down Staircase was published in the mid-60s and probably before. Nothing the custodial staff did at Grover Cleveland would change that. I tried Longfellow's office and the main storage rooms. I found most of the custodial staff clustered in a small lounge on the 3rd floor in the oldest section of the school. One of them saw me and immediately said they were on their afternoon break. The stack of donuts on the table looked big enough to last them through the next ice age. Their lethargy led me to the supposition that they'd been sitting there eating them since the last ice age. I asked for Longfellow and got a lot of shrugs. With 10 minutes left to go before class started, I gave it up and walked back toward the stairs. On the 2nd floor landing, I noticed a door slightly ajar. I pushed it open. It led outside to the roof of the gym. I stepped out and looked around. I heard clangs from a room-sized heating unit 20 feet in front of me. I approached quietly. This had to be the housing for one of the many heating and air conditioning units scattered throughout the complex. The view was glorious. You could see half the south suburbs of Chicago with the forest preserves and all the trees in their full autumn glory. I wanted to admire the view longer, but I had to go to class soon. I had to walk to the other side of the structure before I found a door. It was open and I walked in. Marshall Longfellow stood next to a large engine. My mechanical training is even less than that of a bored cow, so I couldn't possibly recognize its function or what he might be trying to accomplish in fixing it. He hadn't heard me enter, and the doorway was in shadow, so I hadn't cut off much light. Inside was mostly gloom. Near Longfellow, a single bare light bulb glared at his work. Filth enshrouded work clothes covered a corpulent body, nearly 70 years old, refusing to retire. He had a snow-white beard flowing onto his chest and long white hair forming a bushy halo around his head. His red face and the grease streaks he got from scratching his beard were the only color variations in the mass of white. Think of a demented Santa Claus and you've about got it. Longfellow alternately stared at the machine in front of him, whapped it with a foot-long gleaming metal wrench, and sipped from a can of beer. "Mr. Longfellow?" I asked. He spun toward me. The beer can was gone before he turned fully around. I hadn't seen what he'd done with it. He must have been practiced at sneaking a snort or three on the job. He squinted toward me. "What the fuck do you want?" I explained that I wanted to talk to him about what happened after school yesterday. He said, "I already talked to the police. I got nothing to say. Aren't you the English teacher that they think did it?" "I was here yesterday just as you were," I said. He reached behind him and came back with his beer. He took a sip. "I got work to do, and I don't want to talk to you." I heard the bell ring in the distance. I left the roof and walked back to class. Gay Mysteries audiobooks. I think it is easy to hate a label, but a face humanizes the word. So this effort is twofold: to offer comfort to those like myself that your world didn't end because you don't fit into the view of acceptable society on both sides, and in hopes of helping those with family that are LGBTQ, that it doesn't mean we are aliens from the child they once knew. Reassure them so they can maybe be supportive at the same time, being true to their values.